Hello and welcome back to the Armory. The title of our lesson today is, Did Jesus turn water into alcoholic wine? See, many in the religious world today will use this narrative to try to prove that Jesus condones drinking alcohol for recreational use, and the Bible will teach that that is not the case. And so we want to look at John chapter 2 verses 1 through 11, where Jesus made water into wine, to see what had happened and what the Bible says about drinking alcohol. If you'll read the passage with me if you have a Bible, John chapter 2 verses 1 through 11 would say, "And the third day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. And when they had wanted wine, the mother of Jesus saith unto him, They have no wine. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. His mother saith unto the servants, Whatsoever he saith unto you, do it. And there were set there 6 water pots of stone, after the manner of the purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. Jesus saith unto them, Fill the water pots with water. And they filled them to the brim. And he saith unto them, Draw out now, and bear unto the governor of the feast. And they bare it. When the ruler of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and knew not whence it was, but the servants knew where the water came from, the governor of the feast called the bridegroom, and saith unto him, Every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine, and when men have well drunk, then that which is worse. But thou hast kept the good wine until now. This beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee, and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him." And so we'll look at point number 1, the word for wine. You know, several hundred years ago, this Bible was translated from Hebrew and Greek into English, and the words that were used for wine, and maybe even the word hate, were used interchangeably at times. The word hate in Amos 5 chapter 21 means despise or completely abhor. But then that same word hate is used in Luke chapter 14 verse 26, where it says that if any man hate not his mother and father and all that. Well, the word hate there is more carrying the idea of loving someone less. Jesus is saying you must love me more than you love your family. It doesn't mean that you despise your family. And so these words were used generically. They had different meanings. Even the word wine back then had a different meaning. It doesn't mean alcoholic grape juice like it does today. When we use the word wine in the 21st century, we're talking about alcoholic grape juice. But in the 1600s, maybe even in the 1500s, the word wine carried an idea of either alcoholic grape juice or non-alcoholic grape juice. And this is strengthened even further when you look at the Greek word used for wine. The word is oinos, and they use this word interchangeably just like they used the word wine back then. And the word oinos is either alcoholic grape juice or fermented grape juice, or it could be unfermented grape juice. And so these words were used differently in the Old Testament. It depended on the context of how this word was used. And so just because the word wine is in John chapter 2 doesn't mean that Jesus made alcoholic wine. And also it was very common in those days for them to serve very pure and very good unalcoholic grape juice at weddings. This was very common, and actually frowned upon to serve alcohol at a Jewish wedding. And so we'll look at point number 2. Jesus Christ would have never sinned. The book of Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15 would tell us that Jesus was tempted in all points, just like we were, but he was without sin. And so the Son of God never disobeyed the commandments of the Old Testament, which was in effect while he was on the earth. And so if you look at Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 15, it would say, Woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that puttest thy bottle to him, that makest him drunk also, that thou mayest look on their nakedness. And so if Jesus would have gotten people drunk at the wedding in Cana, well, he would have sinned and he would have gotten people drunk. And as the Bible says, woe unto him. But that wouldn't make sense because Jesus never sinned. Jesus never disobeyed any of the Old Testament law. And the Jews held the entire Old Testament as law. And so that wouldn't make any sense, and there would be several contradictions in that point. But Jesus never sinned, and he wouldn't have gotten people drunk. Also, Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 1, it would say that wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise. And so if Jesus would have gotten these people drunk at the wedding in Cana, well, there would have been so many issues with that, so many problems with Jesus sinning. And as we looked at Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15, Jesus Christ never sinned. And now we'll look at point number 3. What about social drinking? You know, many say that it's definitely a sin to be really drunk and to just get utterly wasted in alcohol, and that's a sin. But they will try to condone social drinking, sitting around at a party with just a few people, maybe drinking a few alcoholic beverages, and as long as they get a little tipsy and nothing more, it's okay. And they say that's kind of what happened at John chapter 2. You see, the New Testament, it condemns social drinking. In 1 Peter 4, in verse 3, the elder would write, "For the time past of our life may suffice us, to have wrought the will of the Gentiles, when we walked in lasciviousness, lusts, excess of wine, revelings, banquetings, and abominable idolatries." Now, if you look in the original Greek, that word for banquetings means drinking parties. And so even the New Testament itself condemns social drinking. If you look in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 18, Paul would write to the church at Ephesus, and he would tell them, "And be not drunk with wine, wherein is excess, but be filled with the Spirit." And so the Bible and maybe several other passages in the New Testament that I could show you, if you ever want to contact me, says that drunkenness is a sin. And it's very clear in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 18 that says, "Be not drunk." And so even a little drunk would not be accepted by God. Neither would social drinking be accepted by God. You know, Christians are commanded to be sober. In Titus chapter 2, verse 2, verse 4, and also verse 6, the old men, the old women, the young men, and the young women are all told to be sober-minded. And so it's kind of hard to be sober-minded and be a little bit drunk at the same time. And so the New Testament warns us to stay sober. We need to have a clear mind, as 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8 says, "Be sober and vigilant, because the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour." And so Christians are commanded to be sober, not to be drunk. And so social parties are also condemned in the Bible. Point number 4. What about John chapter 2 and verse 10? I've heard the argument made from John chapter 2 that they had gotten drunk. They say in verse 10, "And when men have well drunk," and right there they'll say that they had gotten drunk at that point. Well, in this context, this is not what John is talking about. You see, it was a tradition in the weddings to serve the very best grape juice first, the most pure grape juice they had. And once they drank everything there, once they drank the best grape juice and it was all gone, then they would serve them the kind of lesser grape juice, the grape juice that didn't taste as well. It wasn't as pure. And so that's what the governor says in verse 10. He would say that when men have drank to the fullest, when they drank every single drop of the good wine, then they would serve that which is worse. And so that argument doesn't stand. If you also look in the end of the verse where it says, "But you have kept the good wine until now." They say that that good wine means alcoholic wine. Well, in that case, it's not really what he is saying. You see, most historians will tell you back in this time, when someone said wine was good wine, they meant that it was at its purest point. They meant that it was very, very clear. It was clear of alcohol. It wasn't fermented. And if you can look at the research, it'll tell you that. And so what the governor was saying is that Jesus made the best wine that anyone has ever tasted. He made the most purest grape juice that anyone in the face of the world has ever made. And who better to do that than God himself? And we'll look at point number 5, the last point. Some will use the arguments in Titus chapter 2 and verse 3 and then 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 8 to say that we can have a little bit of alcohol because it says not given to much wine. Well, there could be some possibilities that Paul is saying here. He could either be referring to not given to much grape juice or not given to much alcoholic grape juice. Now, if he was saying not given to much grape juice, studies have shown that if you drink an over or maybe an excessive amount of grape juice, I mean more grape juice than you should drink, it could lead to a lot of stomach issues. It could lead to a lot of sickness, and your blood could be affected, and it could cause you to even die at times. So maybe at this point Paul was telling the young women and the deacons to not drink so much grape juice and not be gluttonous to where your body is going to be harmed. You know, God had dietary laws back in the book of Leviticus that kept them healthy. And who's to say that that's not what Paul was doing? Now, if Paul did mean alcoholic wine in this point, some will say that, well, if it's alcoholic wine, and he says not much alcoholic wine, that means we can have a little bit of alcoholic wine. Well, if that's the case, I want to turn your attention to the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, and verse 17. It would say, Be not overmuch wicked, neither be thou foolish. And so if the Bible says, don't be overmuch wicked, could I be over a little wicked? Well, no, that's not what that means. And so if it's alcoholic wine, that argument wouldn't stand. What he's telling them is to not be given to much wine. Don't be drunk, or he could be even referring to just regular grape juice, not to be gluttonous. And so I'm glad that you've joined us today on this study, and I really thank you for taking the time to watch this video. And I know many people, they love drinking alcohol more than they love God. Maybe they won't admit that. Maybe they won't tell me that. Maybe they won't tell you that. But when it comes down to loving God and loving those around us, if we truly love God, we're not going to try to condone sin. And many of these arguments made are simply done to just try to condone sin. But my friends, the Bible is strongly against drinking alcohol. It's strongly for being sober-minded. And so if you have trouble with alcohol and you have this temptation, feel free to contact me. I'd love to try to help you in any way I can. I've had a past. I know what it's like. And so I'm willing to help anybody in need. And if you want to study further on this, please feel free to contact me. Thank you for joining us today.